Welcome back to the Pragmatic Guide to Building Muscle. And in today's video, we are going to go through set structure, straight sets, top set, back off sets, and pyramid sets. But before we get into the video, if you do me a big favor and leave me a comment on the video, if you have any questions, like the video, and if you are not subscribed, please do subscribe. I am slowly crawling towards 1,000 subscribers, and I'm going to keep putting these out until I reach that and go well beyond it, of course. So set structure is a little bit more in the weeds relative to what we've talked about in previous videos, but that's because we've talked about all the really important stuff in prior videos, right? We've covered all the basics, all the fundamentals, and now we're getting into what you could maybe say is more of the nitty gritty when it does come to programming. So set structure is an important thing to consider when we're writing a program, because how do we decide how we are going to perform our sets and our reps? And this is where it kind of plays into it. So I'm going to go through some considerations for programming all of these, which are probably the most common ways to program our sets. So before we get into the meat of the video, we are going to go through the decision filter one more time, just to recap our memory. So if you watched earlier videos, you know that this is how we are deciding how to make appropriate decisions for our training. We have to ask yourself, is the decision that we make is going to be specific for us and our muscle building goals? Is the decision something that's going to lead to more progression over time? Is it going to be something that's going to lead to more repeatability, more enjoyment within our training? And is it going to be something that is actually effective for driving muscle growth? Now, the goal of our training when it does come to building muscle is we're trying to balance stimulus with fatigue. We're trying to accumulate effective reps across our session, and we're trying to get towards achieving high levels of mechanical tension, which is coming through effective reps, but it's also coming from balancing that stimulus with fatigue. Because depending on which of these methods you choose, sometimes you get a very, very high level of stimulus, but also a very high level of fatigue relative to maybe another decision that you might make. So it's important that when we're going through these, that we always come back to the decision filter and we go back to what's the actual goal of our training. Okay, let's get into set structure. Straight sets are the most common way that people perform their sets when they are in the gym. They have an exercise and they perform that with a fixed load and fixed rep scheme until the exercise is completed. This is straight sets. So an example here is you go into the gym and you do your leg extensions and you're doing 2 sets of 8 to 12 reps. Now baked into this, which you haven't put on the board, is that we're pushing both of these sets to failure. Now, naturally, you do a set to failure, there's going to be some fatigue lingering around. So into that second set, you will likely have a drop off in terms of rep performance. This is completely normal if you've reached true failure. So on your second set, versus getting 12, now maybe you get 11, maybe you get 10, maybe you get 9. If you have a much bigger drop off than like 3 reps, that could just signal that you didn't rest sufficiently between sets, or there could be some other issues with your recovery, such as your cardiovascular conditioning not being on point, which is going to be something that's helping you to recover between those sets. Now, the benefit of using straight sets is that they are just very simple. They're going to be easy to progress, but for some people, they can be a little bit boring. But ultimately, they work. They do a really good job of balancing stimulus and fatigue. Straight sets are going to make up the majority of your work. For me, they make up a lot of isolation-based work, where I'm just really looking to accumulate good effective volume and track overload very easily. But they're not the only way to do things. And that's where we have the likes of top set and back off sets coming in. So a top set, back off set would be one heavy set followed by one lighter set at a reduced load. So I think when you're going into a heavy set into a light set, I think a 20% reduction in terms of load on the bar is plenty. Any more, and it could just push the reps on that lighter set up so high that it's hard to really gauge true failure, because now you're going to be battling through your pain tolerance as well as cardiovascular conditioning. So I think 20% is as much as I'd take off, but you can always take off less, even 10% if you want to keep the reps, again, quite reasonable. So an example here is you do your hack squat and you do the first set of 6 to 10. After that, you reduce the load by 20% and you do 10 to 15. Now, one of the reasons why top sets and back off sets are so popular and they're so fun to do is that they can be really good for building strength and just having to really kind of lock in for that heavy set and get that scary weight in the bar and push that to a really close proximity to failure versus having to do it multiple times like you would with the straight set. So for some exercises, I'd almost prefer this to be the way we perform it. And that's going to be like your big compound lifts, the ones where most people, if we're being honest, do get a little bit anxious to do them, especially the heavy sets. So that could be your hack squats, your pendulum squats, your barbell squats, your deadlifts, your RDLs, bench press, and so on. Some of the downsides to actually doing top set, back off set is the amount of fatigue that can be generated from the top set alone. So it's not necessarily just the actual stress of the load that you're lifting, but also how psyched up people get before they come into the lift. People get themselves into such a level of arousal that they have like this big come down after the set, and that inhibits their performance after the top set. And when they come into the lighter set, they don't really treat it with as much respect, or their nervous system could be just so shot that they just don't really have the give in them to actually push themselves to a sufficient level of effort. And this ultimately takes away from the goal of, number one, balancing symptoms of fatigue, but also getting to the point of creating effective reps if we just don't have it in us to perform that light set the way we should be. And then the other component that I would consider to be a bit of a con is that if we start to forget what the goal of our training is, if you come into your training and all you're ever thinking about is getting into that top set and progressing on that, and you're starting to almost get into the mindset of a powerlifter now, where you're just focused on moving away from A to B, and your technique is changing as you increase these loads or as you try to get that extra progression, that can be a big limitation to your muscle gain goals. Because maybe at the start of a meso, you're keeping the tension on the target muscle, and now all of a sudden your form is changing to the point where you're starting to compensate a lot to get the load up. So it can get you into this mindset of the top set being the only thing that matters and driving that up at all costs, when the goal is to drive as much stimulus to the target muscle as possible. So this can be a bit of a downside. If you do find yourself getting into this habit, I do recommend probably going over the straight sets for a period of time before allowing yourself to go back to top sets. This is something I do in my own training from time to time. I have a background of powerlifting, so that can easily go into my head and I can easily get into that habit. But once I notice it, I do switch back to straight sets and just get used to managing load better and just really focusing on ensuring I'm creating perfect reps and reps that are close to failure, but not overdoing it in the sense of allowing my technique to break down and starting to compensate. And finally then, we have pyramid sets. So pyramid sets typically are going to be done where we start at a high repetition range, go to a more moderate repetition range, and then into a heavy one. Now, this is less common to be seen in gyms these days, but it can still be a fun way to train. However, it's probably not the one that I recommend the most. Usually I'm gravitating towards programming in straight sets or top set back offs. And a lot of times if I do program in a pyramid set, it's going to be a reverse pyramid where we start with the heavy set into the moderate set and into the high rep set, because I do think starting with the heavy load first is probably going to lead to better performance across all sets versus starting with the really high rep, low load condition, because a lot of people can find that when they start with the low load condition, that strength just really drops off completely relative to if they start with the heavy load first, it doesn't drop off nearly as much. And the example here would be 15 to 20, 10 to 15, and then we could say 6 to 10. Now, a benefit of these is you build up to your heaviest work. So they do have some element of a warm-up built in. And if you're somebody who has good conditioning, they could be a little bit more realistic for you to do with a good level of effort across all sets, because you're going to be able to tolerate the likes of the high rep condition, which is going to come with a lot of acidosis, cell swelling, a lot of pump, which can be quite hard to dissipate before you go into the moderate rep condition. So if your recovery is really good, you could realistically use these, or if you're somebody who's working around an injury. So if you're working around an injury, this could be a way for you to still get an opportunity to load something kind of heavy without actually putting too much strain on the joint, because you get lots of blood flow into the muscle and into the joint before you get into the heavy work. Relative to if you started with the likes of the top set back off, maybe you'd be running into issues out the gate. However, some of the downsides are going to be in regards to fatigue accumulation. So if we perform our high rep set first, we can notice that we have a large amount of fatigue accumulated. And this is something to consider anytime we program in high reps, especially if you're pushing really, really close to failure. Experientially, pushing a set of 6 to 10 to failure is not as difficult as it is with a set of 15 to 20. There's way more pain involved. There's a lot more heavy breathing that's going to be involved in the likes of a set of 15 to 20. So if I was to use something like this, I wouldn't be using it on any big compound movement. I'd be using it on an isolation based movement, if anything. Something like arms, something like delts could be a good place to actually put this, so that you're not really going to be too taxed. And typically you have that at the end of a session versus the start of the session anyway, so you don't have to worry too much about the knock-on impacts of performing your sets like this. But probably most importantly, I do think programming this way is just harder overall to achieve overload. You're starting off with something really, really difficult to start off with. Like a set 15 to 20 all out to failure is extremely tough to gauge true failure first and foremost, but then just the lingering effects of that set carrying on into the moderate set and the high rep set can just be so great that it becomes really an uphill battle to actually add any overload over time. So that would be a kind of main reason not to do them. So hard to overload. It can still be done, depends on the person, right? And this is why this is the pragmatic guide to building muscle. It's all about individualizing the approach. So if you were to program this and you saw that over a couple of weeks that you were able to make these progressions and you're able to recover well between the high rep to moderate rep to low rep condition, well then cool, that works for you, but may not work for everybody. So that's why I'm going to lean towards these straight sets or top set back off sets. So as we wrap up, we're just going to quickly recap each condition and some of the things that we have to consider when we're programming any of these. So our straight sets, these are going to be balanced, simple, and easy to track. We have our top set and back off sets, which are going to be better to increase strength. They can be a little bit more exciting and fun to implement, but they also require you to have good judgment because you need to ensure you're not allowing that heavy set to take away from your effort onto the lighter set. And as well, you need to ensure that it's not taking you out of your ability to maintain your technique and maintain your composure during the set. And then we have our pyramid set. So slightly more complex, you could say, to the rest of them because there are more moving parts when it does come to your progression. They can be fun if you do them correctly. They could be good for working around injuries, but hard to overload. But we can run into overload issues. And that, my friends, covers set structure. I hope you did enjoy the video. I hope you took something away from this because it's something that's not really covered too much in like the science-based lifting world. There's not much research on comparing these methods. So all of this is coming from the coaching toolkit of how I've coached hundreds of clients and coached myself through the years, because there's going to be definitely things that you can see within your training as to where, okay, I'm not progressing as well, my training's not being effective, it's not as enjoyable, and it could be because you just have your exercises set up in a way that's not really kind of allowing for that to happen. And maybe actually looking into, okay, straight sets can be better for this exercise, is a top set back off set going to be easier for this one? That can be something that just takes your training to another level. So that's it for this video. Again, if you did enjoy it, please do consider giving me a like, subscribe if you haven't, and we will catch you in the next one.